Hello and welcome to South Asia Chat, a podcast brought to you by the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. I am your host, Rajni Gamage, a research fellow at the Institute. Sri Lanka's presidential election is to be held in 3 days' time, on Saturday, the 21st of September. This is the first election to be held since the 2022 economic crisis and the mass street protests that ousted President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. The 2024 presidential election in Sri Lanka has been dominated by three main candidates. The first being the incumbent President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who is running on an independent form. The second being the main opposition party, the Samagi Jana Balawegaya or SJB's leader, Sajith Premadasa. And the third frontrunner candidate is the National People's Power, the MPP leader, Anura Kumara Dissanayake. So to understand the dynamics surrounding the upcoming presidential election in Sri Lanka, I am joined today by Dr. Pradeep Pieris, who is a senior lecturer at the Department of Political Science and Public Policy at the University of Colombo in Sri Lanka. Thank you for joining me today, Dr. Pradeep.
Thank you, Rajni.
So to start off the conversation, and I think to give our listeners some kind of context of the climate and the dynamics that are surrounding the elections at present, could you give us a sense of what it is like?
Yes, I think we are heading towards one of the most crucial presidential election we had since 1982. Up until this election, all the presidential election was fought based on different ideological, economic, the policy platforms, ideological camps. But this is the first time where the election seems to be where people will decide whether they support the political leadership that they had last 75 years or whether they want to change it. So Mr. Anura Kumara Dissanayake represents the camp that those who really want to change the current political system, wants to bring new political leadership to the country. But whereas all other candidates, basically, they are to contest, they are contesting to sustain the current political context and then to, continue this system. So I think in that way, the current election is extremely important, very tense, but very different from all the election what we had last, 40 years.
Especially as you mentioned that in this election, there doesn't seem to be much of an ideological foreground into the contestation among the different groups.
Yep.
The reason I'm asking this is because I would argue also that, and I'm sure some others also have, that there appears to be some kind of moving closer towards the center on some economic issues. And the most commonly cited illustration of this is that all three of the camps have appear to be keen to continue with the current IMF program. But I also do agree with the fact that when we portray this kind of economic consensus, that we tend to miss out on some of the distinctions among these three camps. And this election being the first election after the 2022 economic crisis, we also see within the campaigns, within the manifesto, the economic issues being forefront beyond all other things. So could you kind of help us understand how to make sense of this consensus as well as the difference among these three camps?
You're very right. I think one of the biggest challenge right now Sri Lanka face is the economic crisis. And this crisis is not something that we will be able to solve by having one election. So this crisis is going to stay on for some time. And as you correctly said, like almost all the candidates who contest for this election seems to have a consensus about subscribing to the kind of continuation of the current economic policy. Maybe here and there you may have certain deviations, but at least definitely these three main candidates, they have confirmed to us that they are not planning to change the current strategy or current economic reform process. So, I mean, for example, we also must remember since 1977, since the day that neoliberalism was introduced to Sri Lanka, even though election was fought for and against, the neoliberal economic policy, but once they got elected, they continue to stick to the neoliberal economic principles. So even if you look at someone like Chandrika Banana Kumar Tunga, who was like ardent critic, before, while she was in opposition, but once in the government, she happily continued that. So I don't think current the trend or the current context where all the candidates are going to continue with the IMF program is something one needs to be very surprised about it, because all
Right.
three candidates, their main ideology, the main philosophy in this election is the pragmatism. So they basically know none of them wants to basically rock the boat. They really want to, because everyone well aware about that, whether the crisis is going to continue beyond this election, and
Mhm.
more challenges to come in months and years to come. So I think, yeah. So in that way, I mean, I'm not very surprised the fact that there's a certain level of convergence, there are a certain level of consensus among these candidates, and also people too really wanted to have some assurance that no matter whoever wins the election, their situation will not get worse. So in that way, I think in this election, even though it's fought on the very different basis, a lot of things are going to continue. So only
Yes.
change I may expect from this election, we may be able to see some sort of new faces
Mhm.
uh, will enter into politics, and politics will be fought on a slightly different ethos than what it used to be all this time. But other than
Right.
that, I think a lot of things going to continue.
Kind of following up on that observation or reflection, how would you then account for this promise of system change that the MPP in particular is being seen to wield with more credibility?
This is the problem that NPP will face, even if they manage to make a huge electoral victory, which seems to be more likely now. But they are going to be definitely face this challenge because they have managed to trigger this expectation of system change and the different kinds of politics. This is somewhat similar to what Gotabaya Rajapaksa did back in 2019. I mean, where he also promised Sri Lankan that he's going to be different. He can really change the political culture and bring more technocrats, bring more experts into the policy making, and will be more. But of course, I'm not denying the fact that he took an extremely different political ideology, which is very singular Buddhist nationalist ideology. But even with the NPP and Anura Kumara Dissanayake, uh, they must understand, I'm sure they have already understood, there's always limit in the change that one can really expect in this country. So, I mean, that is how always politics travel, no? Policy, even I
Yes.
don't think the enlightenment happened overnight, no? It took about hundreds or maybe thousands of years to, change the
Yes.
system. So, the political system, what we have, which we have practiced last 75 years, will take many, many decades. But
Mm.
if NPP wins this election, they might be able to plant a seed towards that
Mhm.
change. But their future going to be far more difficult or challenging than if any of the other two candidates wins the election. So I mean, everyone must should expect
Mhm.
things are going to be a bit challenging under NPP rule.
Right. So it sounds more like gradual, kind of progressive reform uh, compared to a more kind of radical revolutionary change that the
Yeah,
kind
the
of
thing is, it's not, I mean, people
yes,
now at the time of election, people like novel ideas. People like
yes,
new brands. People like new faces. So parties or the camps who manage to bring this new branding, new ideas, always capture the imagination, captures the attention of people. This is exactly what happened back in 2019, but this is in a much more bigger way. It's taking place now with the NPP. But
yes,
like promising something very attractive and delivering in the same what they promise, it's a two different things, because even though people like your system change, but nobody has basically signed up uh,
mhm,
to compromise for that compromise that needed for the system change, no?
yes, yes. So it does seem like with the NPP camp, there's a lot of hope, and this is a positive thing in a time of an economic crisis. But then with that hope that it generates, it has to manage a lot of expectations, which is a tall task.
Mm.
I think I'll lead from there to the next question. You mentioned before as well, signposted this issue of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism that was certainly more prevalent and more explicit during the 2019 presidential election campaign.
Mm.
And compared to that election, we observed that issues of Sinhala Buddhist nationalism appear to be quite muted during this election cycle. And would you agree with this or not? And can you help us understand what potential nationalist politics have not only in the election campaign cycle, but also after a new government has been formed?
I mean, you're right. Clearly, after the failure of Gotabaya Rajapaksa regime, which also like being seen as a huge failure and embarrassment for the Sinhala Buddhist uh, nationalist ideologues, right? And they failed miserably. So as a result, so that idea like fighting an election under Sinhala Buddhist nationalism become extremely difficult, and it's not a winning card anymore. I think uh, the guardians of the Sinhala Buddhist nationalist politics in this country, which is largely the Rajapaksas and their, Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, they understood that. So as a result, you see that, but they are not, that doesn't mean that they completely uh, gave up that idea called singular Buddhist nationalism. I think they basically very strategically preserving the idea without using in this election, but to be used in the future election. For example, I mean, you see that the NP, sorry, SLPP, the Rajapaksa's camp has been like divided to many camps now. Now, for example, the technocrats, like more people who are more functioning on uh, patent-client relationships, they have basically lined up under uh, either Ranil Wickremesinghe or otherwise Sajith Premadasa.
Mhm.
But also, like, the very ardent single Buddhist nationalist politicians whose bases are mainly like, depending on the single Buddhist nationalist ideas, they have basically put up another camp under Dilich Jayavira. So they continue to really like, like, they continue to like propagate those ideas. They continue to really like, use the single Buddhism in their campaign. But all these things, basically, they want to preserve this idea. So, of course, not in this election. Winner may not really make any benefit out of single Buddhist propaganda, but that doesn't mean that this single Buddhism as a very politically powerful idea has basically gone away.
Right. I mean, as you mentioned in that, even I was thinking, even though earlier on in the stages of the election, nationalism seemed to take on this soft nationalism form. We did see, like you said, within the Samagi Jana Balawegaya,
Yeah.
given representation to this. then the Namal Rajpaksa camp, which I would like to maybe ask a question from. But also, I think I remember listening to a speech by Dayasiri Jayasekara within the SJB as well, where he was making certain signaling in terms of not necessarily nationalist, Sinhala Buddhist nationalism, but in terms of anti-India, so the left, other markers of the left nationalist camp.
Yeah.
But that's a side comment. So I would like to kind of follow up and ask how you assess Namal Rajapaksa's campaign in terms of occupying this left nationalist space.
I think in this election, the most sophisticated candidate is Namal Rajapaksa, and his camp. I'm very impressed by the Rajapaksa's capacity to really steer the Sri Lankan politics, because this is definitely an election that SLPP is meant to lose. They are well aware about that, but they also in a crisis that the leadership crisis, like transferring the leadership from father to son. So that is also needed. But what I see by putting forward Namal as a candidate, after having supported Ranil Wickremesinghe for 2 years, and also letting some of his members to support Ranil Wickremesinghe's campaign, Rajapaksa basically uh, surprised all of us by putting forward Namal Rajapaksa. Now, in this way, I think Rajapaksa really wanted Ranil Wickremesinghe to lose, and maybe some sort of a weak government to come to power, and thereby basically uh, pave the way for a kind of a political uncertainty, instability for about another few years to come, and that will pave the way for Namal Rajapaksa to, come as the next leader of the country. So I think these elections, they're manipulating in such a uh, level that's basically result a win-win situation for them.
Right. As a follow-up question to that, really, it is when you talked about the success in terms of the Namal Rajapaksa campaign, but also the leadership transition within the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna.
Yeah.
I started thinking about, especially since you have written extensive scholarship on the political party system in Sri Lanka. I cannot help but ask a question on how you see the landscape of political parties within this election cycle, because just to add my 2 cents, we can see a lot of political fragmentation that is happening within the main 3 camps, but also within the minority parties. And that makes it, a difficult task for analysts to kind of predict what is happening in the election cycle and post-government, but also it makes it a tall task for the voters, because there's so much of movement between parties and out of parties, and the increasing prominence of individuals within these parties. So how would you kind of assess the state of political parties in Sri Lanka within this election cycle?
No, I mean, clearly, if you see the broad view of the current the way the political parties functioning at this election, shows that all established parties have basically uh, broken down to pieces. They have lost capacity to function as the proper institutionalized democratic political parties. But that is not necessarily something to do with the current election. I think this was happening because parties were born and parties function under particular political, economic conditions. And even if you look at Sri Lankan political parties, they were also born under particular socio-economic context. But things have changed now. For example, now most of the parties that we, like for example, take UNP, the SLFP, those TNA, SLMC, these are parties, they emerge in response to the Sri Lanka certain political history in this country. For example, 30 years of war has basically shaped the the character of all Sri Lankan parties. Now, for example, what is happening to TNA, what is happening to the SLFP, UNP, they also shows that the since the context have changed, the parties no longer function in the same character, in the same formation. So that needs to change. So now this is the kind of a transition of parties leaving their uh, uh, they're leaving their usual condition to like a new terrain. But also the economic condition also have changed the way political parties function. Now, for example, if you look at party literature across the world, parties, the party as institution that also have transformed, like at one point as a cadre parties, and then as a mass parties, and then as a catch-all parties. And most of the parties have become kind of a cartelization, cartel parties, where individuals are more powerful and the party institution is extremely weak. And also in that cartelization, political leaders, they can make any number of they can make coalition under various like various fashion. It's almost like this, no? Like say suppose now in mathematics you have something called combination and permutations. When you have few numbers, those numbers can arrange in different ways to make different number, right? So same way, so we currently what we see, politicians function so individually. So at the time of election, they coming together to form various alliances or coalition, and contest the election. So in that case, uh, I think uh, parties now uh, they're no longer really supporting a strong ideological policy programs. I mean,
Mhm.
rather than I think almost all parties are promising the proper government,
Yes.
with the expert input, more services, more patronage. I mean, things like that. But hardly they promise anything very substantial that we
Yes.
used to experience back in 1970s.
Mhm.
So now, if you look at the current, what has happened to NPP, despite like huge expectation that it's a very much of a social democratic party which is there to reform the country, change the political system. But when you listen to them carefully, I mean, even they themselves do not really uh, subscribe to a kind of a larger agenda, except for good governance, no?
Yes, that's very interesting, Dr. Pradeep, because as you mentioned, the declining kind of sense of a strong, clear ideology within these parties
Yeah.
kind of adds up to even observations that we have made on in terms of the sources of political legitimacy. In
Yep.
Sri Lanka, we are observing increasingly different political camps, political parties are being forced to rely on appendages of
Yeah.
technocrats, of academics, whether it was Vietmaga during Gotabaya Rajapaksa's time or whether it is the kind of group of increasingly academics and other intellectuals, middle class, that
Yeah.
we see the current MPP outfit happening. So
Yeah.
that's very
Yeah.
interesting. So moving on to a final question, I think you've given a very comprehensive kind of overview of the dynamics around the elections. What are some of the challenges that you foresee in the immediate aftermath of results being declared, especially if we go into a second round of counting? There will be a small interim period before the results are declared. And so that's in the immediate aftermath. But I would also like to extend the question and ask what major challenge you see in the long term, in the next 2 to 3 months going forward with one of these three candidates coming into power.
Irrespective of whoever wins this election will be a beginning of a period of political uncertainty. So it's going to be extremely challenging time to come. There will be a lot of political instability. As a result, I mean, we may have to go for multiple elections in next few years to come, because uh, I think whoever wins the presidential election, the challenge would be the parliamentary election. So there is no chance of this parliamentary election going to give very clear mandate to any party. What I feel is if NPP comes, there will be very rather peaceful power transition. But after, assuming the duty as the executive president, Anura Kumara will have to face huge challenges from various corners, like the current business community, the media tycoons, the temples who basically put their weight behind the other two, capitalist, standard political candidates. They will use all sort of the strategies to undermine the rule of Anura Kumara Dissanayake. And also he will also have to face the deep state and the bureaucrats who basically worked hand in hand with the politicians now who support either Ranil Wickremesinghe or Sajith Premadasa or even Ramal Rajapaksa. They will also try to undermine and make Anura Kumara's regime very unpopular. So in that way, he will have to face huge challenge, and the only way that Anura Kumara will have to handle it, he'll have to be more authoritarian and he has to use force. So which means that so we will lead to kind of a contraction of democratic space, not necessarily because he's desired, but also he may force to do that. Otherwise, he may not be able to run the government. So clearly, if he wins, I don't think he may be able to make the similar kind of victory in the parliament because parliamentary seats going to be distributed distributed among all the players. So in that case, Anura will have to either work as a larger coalition with various partners, which is, I think, highly unlikely. What would be more likely, where that Anura Kumara Dissanayake will have to cohabitate with another government, most probably either headed by someone like Ranil Wickremesinghe or maybe Namal Rajapaksa or maybe even Sajith Premadasa. So that will be a kind of a very, very, very difficult period, politically unstable, and we may not be able to see any progress. So that will only can be solved with another election. So I think that would happen if Anura Kumara wins this election. But if other two win the election, they also face a similar kind of situation, but not as much as resistance from the deep state for those candidates because they have already been working with the Sajith Premadasa as well as Ranil Wickremesinghe. But anyway, there won't be clear parliamentary majority. So in that case, we will surely lead into an extremely volatile political period next few years to come. So, I mean, that is the context within which we may have to try to resolve the economic crisis and also to somehow retain the democratic spaces. So my message and what I had to say is not very, very positive.
Right. I mean, I think that's very interesting, as you say, when a new actor comes into an established system and attempts change, even good change, positive change on a transformative scale as envisioned, there is a social cost that comes to it. So I think that was very interesting. Thank you very much, Dr. Pradeep, for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Right. You were listening to Dr. Pradeep Pieris, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Political Science and Public Policy at the University of Colombo. Pradeep Pieris has also published a book in Springer in 2022 called Catch-All Parties and Party Water Nexus. So I would encourage all the listeners to read this book. It's very informative. You are listening to South Asia Chat. To learn more about our work, please visit us at isas.nus.edu.sg. You can also get updates through social media. We are on X, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you.